Hi, my name is Likitha Nanduri, and this is the work that I did over this past quarter with Dr. Stiber, and also the work that I presented to the academic showcase this quarter. So basically, my work had to do with this simulation software called Graphitti, which is basically this open source C++ infrastructure that is used to simulate these large-scale graph structures. Graph structures. So basically Graphitti was designed so that researchers can actually study neural networks and different types of network systems using the same framework. Now that's a lot of words, so really quickly, basically this all works on this thing called graphs, and graphs are these computer science data structure, and to simply put, they have these two main components, and one is called a vertice and the other is called an edge. So the vertice, I like to think of this as the neuron in your brain, and the edge is kind of like the connections between them. And this basically is a huge version of just that. So my research question, or what I focused on as part of Graphitti, was kind of figuring out how that simulation is being recorded, because as researchers, it's not just important to see the simulation, but it's also important to study the outputs. So a really quick overview of how Graphitti kind of works is, first it takes that configuration input files to kind of set up your overall simulation, and then it goes into your domain model components. So these are the components that are interacting with each other and kind of making that network system and simulation work. And then from there you have your recorder output. And basically what that did is it would basically save those components that we just talked about and the different parts that researchers would actually use to study their simulation, whether they want to reproduce the results or compare the results. And lastly, you have the research data that was being recorded. So again, I worked on the recorder aspect of Graphitti. So how I worked on it was I basically first learned and traced how Graphitti actually saves those data points within the recorder. And then from there, I basically worked on a few fixes. So for example, some of the registered variables were being filled, but towards the end, right before the output was being saved, it didn't fill those values in. So a fix that I did was basically connect to those edges that I just talked about, which are the connections between like the vertices, and I took that and filled in those last remaining registered variables. And then another few things is I basically kind of looked in and I found that basically improved those recorder defaults at the end of the day. And those are kind of like the overall things that I did, but something that I like to kind of tell people about Graphitti is this framework is currently being used on a different simulation that we're running called NG911. And NG911 is basically this emergency communications system that this is basically kind of running. So it basically kind of connects that caller to those appropriate dispatch centers. So I think that's really cool. And to be honest, this is my first actual research project that I did here at Bothell and formally. And it's surprising to see how much of what I learned through my classes was being applied here. For example, like my software design and my data structures courses. I'm a CSS student, and so all of those things that I was learning in those classes were actually being applied. So it was very interesting to be like, oh, I don't know any of this, and wow, I really know this. So that was like really cool. Yeah, that was like interesting. Another thing was, it was kind of cool to see that my technical writing classes also kind of played a role in a sense in learning how to make that documentation so that I can tell people what I did, what I need to know, what I messed up on, what I need help with. So all of those things are really important for me, and I thought that was really cool that I was able to explain those. I guess a word of advice from someone who kind of just did their first research project is that don't be afraid to talk to professors and people that you really want to talk to about their work, because most of the time, like 99% of the time, they really want to talk to you. They really want to understand what you're interested in, and they'd be happy to like help you get to a position where you can also contribute to their work or even work on your individual work. So that is something that I found to be like really challenging in the beginning, because I didn't really know how to approach these professors who have done so much already and without knowing much myself. So that is a piece of advice that I'd give. And thank you for listening.